Hey guys, I just got back from the movie theater and I just saw American Made, starring Tom Cruise, written by Gary Spinelli and directed by Doug Liman. Now I'll jump right into it. This is based on a true story, obviously, from the 1980s. Tom Cruise plays a guy named Barry Seal, who was a former airline pilot with TWA, ended up getting dragged into a bunch of different stuff by the CIA, the DEA, the White House, and ends up even working with the Medellin drug cartel at one time with Pablo Escobar and some other well-known figures that have been covered in other movies. Now the main story has Tom / Barry Seal working with the CIA and like all those other groups that I had mentioned. He's kind of in this drug smuggling / weapon smuggling, intelligence gathering, love triangle between all of these different groups, if you will. It leads to some very interesting moments. Barry ends up having, fights with his wife, but he ends up making amends for it because he's making so much money. If you've ever seen Blow, or if you've ever seen, I've never seen Narcos, but I've heard of it enough. Movies like that, you know that there's like a lot of money flowing around in the 80s in this drug trade, and he's making like a ton of money doing this, like way more money than he was as an airline pilot, and he's just, he's packing it in different things. He's like buying banks and vaults and putting the the money in there, and he's like money laundering, obviously, because he has so much cash floating around. Now towards the end of the film, obviously you can imagine it's a very stressful situation. He's basically wanted for all these different crimes that he's committed, even though he's working with the CIA and other groups that are not the CIA are also trying to implicate him in all these other crimes, and it's kind of like a crazy, weird situation. You'd think like the CIA was helping him out, which they were, but they really weren't at the end of the day, if that kind of makes sense. So he ends up having to do a couple more missions, and one of the missions ends up going awry, and he becomes one of the most wanted men by the Medellin drug cartel that he was once working for. And I'm going to leave the overall plot at that because I don't want to ruin too many things. But I will say that Tom Cruise steals the show. I mean, I've been a fan of his since Mission Impossible 1. That's the first movie I ever remember seeing because when I was very young, obviously, when it came out. Huge fan of Tom Cruise. Also, The Firm was amazing, and Born on the 4th of July was amazing. That's one of my favorite movies ever, actually. He ends up doing a great job. I know the last 10 years or so, it's funny, actually, Tom Cruise, like I just mentioned, The Firm and Born on the 4th of July, movies like that, he was super popular. That's how he got his bread and butter back in the day. That was like his wheelhouse right there. And then he turned into Mr. Mission Impossible and The Mummy and movies like that, where he's like constantly saving the day. And he's kind of gotten away from those other type of movies, but here he's making his return to just a simple, not low budget, but more like Jack Reacher style, than something like The Mummy that's like a huge blockbuster type movie. And he just does such a damn good job. Like, he's good in those other, big, summer blockbusters, but this is where he is super good. Like, he plays the husband that's caring for his family so well, and he plays just the everyman, even though it's Tom Cruise, like the biggest movie star in the world in my lifetime, probably, outside of maybe a couple other people that could maybe argue that. But he just plays the everyman so well, and he just radiates charisma off the screen. Like, he's not one of these like boring actors that you just don't really care. Like, he instantly pulls you in. Like, from scene one, you're just like hooked on Tom Cruise. The supporting cast obviously is really good as well for the most part. The biggest thing with the supporting cast, which is what happens in most movies, they just didn't get any time, like outside of like his wife and maybe a handful of other characters. Like the CIA guy that ends up pulling him in, you don't even get to know him other than he is just a CIA like robot, basically. He's just like in the machine of the government, and he's just trying to get the job done. But you don't get to see him like struggling in any way. He just kind of shows up and comes out as the plot dictates. I thought the main story it didn't drag at all because the movie was paced very well. It wasn't too long. I always say, this movie's 15 minutes too long, this movie's 15 minutes too long. This one was perfectly timed. It just could have been reined in a little bit more. If Doug Liman had reeled in the story a little bit more, and maybe if things had been written slightly differently in the last 30 minutes, I would say, I would probably give this movie a higher score. Well, I definitely would give the movie a higher score. I think the direction just kind of faded towards the end. The story just didn't help the supporting cast, if you will, outside of like his wife, like I mentioned. Like, the family dynamic was really, really well done. But just the CIA plot points just popped up, right at the perfect time, like almost too perfectly, I think that the direction was probably like the weakest part of the movie, to be honest with you. Like I said, the acting was fine, the characters just didn't get enough time, if you will, but there was some funny like characters in there. For any Grand Theft Auto fans out there, some of the supporting characters kind of reminded me of like Trevor and like characters like that. They were just like crazy freaking characters, like so weird. So the writing and directing definitely hurt this movie at times, but some of the scenes were really funny, and I think it was more the actors pulling it off than the director and writer. So I'm going to give this a 3.75 out of 5. It was really good, don't get me wrong. I know I hammered it a little bit, but I do liken this to The Good Guys. If you watch this, slightly different time period, obviously. I think The Good Guys was more like 70s era, where this was more in the 80s. But it just shows you, like, I compare these two together, where one was more like a buddy cop movie, and this one's more obviously like a biopic. I think you could watch these movies together, you know, maybe same day, and get a really good kick out of like watching like an old-timey like type story from, you know, 20, 30, 40 years ago. Overall, it was a good time at the movies for sure. I would say that this is a good companion piece to a movie like Blow or a series like Narco. Even Carlos Later, who is in Blow, I believe, and who's also, you know, well-known character in that series of events that happened in real life with Pablo Escobar and the Medellin drug cartel. He's even in this movie, American Made, obviously. Well, there's an actor playing him, obviously, but I think this is a good companion piece of those types because it just shows you another aspect of what the cartel and what the government was doing at the time. And this also dug into some other things about, you know, the Sandinistas and some other things. It's not just a drug smuggling movie by any means. I mean, there's other things going on. Overall, I think this movie was perfectly timed. I didn't think it was too short, too long whatsoever. Tom Cruise is amazing. The family dynamic that they played off of was really, really cool, and you got to meet part of his wife's family and whatnot, and that was all interesting as well, and came to an explosive conclusion, if you will, for anybody that sees the movie. But the writing and directing, I felt, was spotty and weak at times, to be 100% honest with you. And it didn't do 100% of a good job of showing, like The Good Guys really submerged you in the 70s. Whereas this didn't necessarily submerge you in the 80s, more probably because the 80s was more of a transition period to how it is today, in terms of like how the world is and looks. Whereas the 70s is like, looks ancient at this point. So there is some of that there, but it didn't do quite as good a job as that, and I keep comparing it to The Good Guys because it's a good comparison. But thank you guys for watching. I think you will enjoy the movie. Go check it out. It's definitely a good time at the movies. It's very, very, very solid, you know, 3.75 out of 5. So go check it out, guys. I do appreciate it. Check out all of our other videos in our library as well as in the future by subscribing and hitting like on this video. Thank you, guys.